That day, the sun showed no mercy. Its scorching rays bore down on the desert with such intensity that the earth itself seemed to cry out. There, in that desolate expanse of sand and stone, a young woman lay shackled, her wrists bound tightly to iron stakes driven deep into the hard ground. Her ankles were lashed so firmly that the rope cut into her flesh. She was spread out like an offering to the unforgiving sky. Her clothing was ripped, her lips split and raw, and her hair clung to her face with perspiration. Each breath came shallow, each attempt to move a test of endurance. The villagers gathered at a distance, watching in silence. Some averted their gaze, overcome with shame. Others stared with grim approval, as though her torment validated their own anxieties. Standing at the forefront was Marcus Redfield, the village leader, a man whose gaze was piercing and whose words carried undeniable power. His hand lingered on his whip, though he had no need to raise it. The ropes and the sun did the work for him. Redfield's voice cut through the stillness. "This is the tradition of our ancestors," he announced, gesturing toward the girl. "Should she endure 3 days beneath the heavens, she goes free. Should she perish, her guilt is confirmed. This is our law." No one dared oppose him. The villagers nodded slowly, some murmuring prayers, others spitting into the earth as though sealing the ritual. The girl's name was Clara Bennett. She was only 23. She had been accused of theft by the very people now witnessing her punishment. Gold had disappeared from the village stores, and Redfield had declared her the culprit. She denied it with every fiber of her being, but her protests held no power against his word. Now she lay helpless, her skin blistering beneath the relentless heat. Her voice broke as she tried to speak. "Please, I'm begging you. I've done nothing. Please." But the wind swept her words away, and the crowd remained motionless. Children clung to their mothers. Old men stood with folded arms. No one stepped forward. To them, this wasn't brutality. This was righteousness. This was heritage. 4 generations, they had honored this practice of fire and sand, and to question it meant defying the village itself. So they turned and left, abandoning her to the judgment of the sky. The sun rose higher. The ground beneath Clara seared her skin. Her eyelids fluttered as though even the effort of seeing was too great. Hours dragged on. Her world narrowed to the rhythm of her heartbeat and the droning of flies over the parched soil. She could taste blood. Her voice had faded beyond cries. Now it was merely a whisper, absorbed by the desert. Yet in that moment of hopelessness, one thought held fast. She didn't want to die unacknowledged. She didn't want to disappear without anyone hearing her truth. Her lips quivered, and she prayed that anyone might pass through this forsaken place and hear her plea. But who would come? And if they did, would they dare challenge the weight of tradition? Would they confront Redfield and the village, or would they walk past, leaving her to the sun's verdict? The sun was lowering, yet its heat still burned fiercely enough to scorch the skin. Clara's voice had diminished to barely a whisper. She believed no one would arrive. Then she heard it, the sound of hooves striking dry earth. Slow. Deliberate. Her eyes opened just slightly, and through the shimmering heat she saw him, a tall figure on horseback, his posture upright, moving with the measured caution of a man who had seen battle and survived. Daniel Brennan, 56 years old, now a rancher, but once a soldier who had returned from war carrying both wounds and memories. He had chosen solitude over companionship, labor over laughter, a quiet ranch over the noise of towns. But that solitude ended when he saw her, a girl staked to the ground, skin torn by rope, lips cracked from thirst. She lifted her head just enough to whisper, "Please. I'm begging you, untie me." The words struck him like a blow. He could have ridden on. It would have been safer. Everyone knew better than to cross Marcus Redfield and his laws. But Daniel wasn't the kind of man who could ignore suffering. Not after what he'd witnessed. Not after the family he'd lost because others turned away. He dismounted. The dry ground crunched beneath his boots. He knelt beside Clara, his shadow offering her brief relief. Her eyes searched his, filled with both terror and hope. "You're not guilty, are you?" he asked quietly. "No," she rasped, her voice barely audible. "I swear on my life. I'm not." Daniel drew a knife from his belt and cut the ropes binding her wrists. The cord snapped free, leaving angry red welts on her skin. Her hands shook as though she couldn't believe she was unbound. Then he cut the ropes at her ankles and lifted her with surprising strength for his age. She weighed almost nothing. The desert had already taken too much. He carried her toward his horse. Behind them, unseen, a pair of villagers watched from the ridge, eyes wide with shock. They would return to Redfield soon enough. The rancher hadn't just broken a law, he had defied tradition itself. As Daniel placed Clara on the saddle, her voice cracked again. "They'll kill you for this." Daniel glanced at her, his jaw set. "Let them try." With a tug on the reins, the horse moved forward, carrying them away from that cursed ground. But neither knew what awaited just beyond the ridge. Would Redfield and his men allow them to escape so easily, or was this only the start of something far more perilous? Daniel had barely guided the horse past the ridge when he heard the shout, "Stop right there, Brennan." The words carried sharply across the dry wind. He pulled the reins and turned. There stood Marcus Redfield with 4 men behind him. Redfield's long coat billowed in the breeze, his hand hovering near his revolver. Behind him, one man carried a heavy club, another held a knife glinting in the sun, and a third gripped a pistol half drawn from its holster. Redfield's eyes locked on Daniel. "You think you can ride off with her? You just spit on the law of this village, the law of our fathers." Daniel spoke low, calm, steady. "That law isn't justice, Marcus. It's cruelty, and you know she's no thief. You just needed someone to blame." Redfield's lips curled into a humorless grin. His men spread out to block the trail. Clara clutched the saddle horn, whispering in fear. "They'll kill you." Daniel shifted his weight, his hand brushing the handle of his old Colt, though he kept it holstered. The silence stretched. Then the first man rushed forward, swinging the club. Daniel sidestepped and drove his fist into the man's stomach. The club clattered to the ground as the man doubled over. The second came fast with the knife. Daniel caught his wrist, twisted hard, and sent the blade flying into the dirt. A sharp elbow to the jaw dropped him flat. The third raised his pistol. Clara gasped, but Daniel was quicker. He kicked the man's arm. The gun fired wildly into the sky, and Daniel slammed him down into the dust. The last man froze, eyes darting to Redfield for direction. Redfield didn't move. His jaw clenched, but his hand stayed near his revolver without drawing. He knew better than to push this fight further. Daniel had fought wars, and Redfield could see it in his eyes. The rancher wasn't bluffing. Redfield spat into the dirt. "This isn't finished, Brennan. You and the girl will pay, both of you." He turned sharply and motioned his men to follow. The beaten men scrambled up, limping back with their pride as broken as their bodies. Silence fell again. Daniel breathed heavily but steadily. He climbed onto the horse beside Clara, who looked at him with both terror and wonder. Neither spoke as they rode on, but both knew this was only the beginning. Redfield had been humiliated, and men like him never forgot. Now the question hung heavy: where could they run? And who, if anyone, would dare stand with them? If you're still here, thank you. Hit that subscribe button so you won't miss what happens next in this story. And while you sip your coffee or tea, tell me, what time is it where you are, and where are you listening from? The town was quiet when Daniel guided the horse into the sheriff's yard. Clara swayed in the saddle, half conscious, and Daniel caught her before she fell. Sheriff Jacob Stone stepped out from his office, his hand resting on his belt as he watched them approach. "Daniel Brennan," he said slowly. "I haven't seen you since the war, and now you show up with a girl about ready to collapse. What in God's name happened?" Daniel carried Clara inside and set her on a bench. Redfield's name left his lips like a stone. The sheriff's face hardened. "That man has been strutting like a king for too long," Stone muttered. He knelt by Clara, checked the rope burns on her wrists, and shook his head. "She'll need water, food, and rest. But I believe her story. Still, belief isn't enough. We'll need proof." He looked back at Daniel. "Give me time. I'll dig. I'll send men to question the traders. I'll check Redfield's accounts and his storehouse. If he's dirty, We'll find it. Daniel nodded. He trusted this man. They had once fought shoulder to shoulder, and though years had hardened them both, that bond remained. The days that followed passed slowly but heavily. Clara stayed in a small room near the sheriff's office. Daniel visited often, sometimes bringing her bread or a tin cup of coffee. At first, she spoke little, her voice faint from the desert. But slowly, she began to open up. She told him about her parents, about the farm she once tended, about how everything was lost when Redfield's men accused her. Daniel listened, his weathered face softening in the candlelight. She asked him about the war. He gave no glory, only quiet stories of nights too long and mornings too bitter. They shared silences, too. Silences that carried more weight than words. One evening, Clara looked at him, her eyes steady for the first time. "You could have left me there. Why didn't you?" Daniel studied her for a long moment. "Finally," he answered, "because no one should die like that. And because I've lost enough already." She reached across the table, her hand brushing his. For a moment, the rancher who had hidden from the world felt something stir again. But outside the walls of that room, danger brewed. Redfield's men moved through taverns and alleys, whispering threats. Sheriff Stone returned with reports that pointed to missing shipments, accounts that didn't add up, and traders who spoke of Redfield's shadow deals. It was only the beginning, but it was enough to know the storm was coming. Daniel stood at the window one night, watching the street lamps flicker in the dark. Clara's voice broke the silence. "Do you think we'll ever be free of this?" Daniel turned, his face lined with both fear and hope. "I don't know," he said, and the question hung heavy in the air. Would the sheriff's investigation be enough to bring Redfield down? Or would Redfield strike first, before the truth could ever see the light? The sheriff's investigation moved faster than Redfield expected. 4 days, Sheriff Stone sent men to question traders and comb through dusty ledgers. Piece by piece, the truth began to form. Traders spoke. Records surfaced. Gold shipments that should have reached nearby towns had vanished without a trace, and all of it pointed back to one man, Marcus Redfield. Sheriff Stone rode into the village with Daniel and Clara at his side. The townspeople gathered, their faces tense as Stone laid out the evidence. Redfield shouted, cursed, called it lies, but the weight of proof was heavy. And for the first time, the people looked at him not with fear, but with rage. They had feared him for years, but with the sheriff's proof in hand, their fear turned to fury. Daniel watched in silence as voices rose. The same villagers who had once left Clara in the sun now turned on the man who had condemned her. They dragged Redfield to the very place where Clara had suffered. 4 iron stakes waited in the dust, ropes ready. The villagers spoke as one. "If the sun is our judge, let it judge you, Redfield." His protests fell flat, swallowed by the same law he had forced on others. Redfield was bound to the ground, staring up at the same merciless sky he had trusted to punish the weak. Clara stood behind Daniel, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. "It's cruel," she whispered. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "Yes," he said. "But sometimes a cruel law swallows the man who made it. And maybe that's justice enough." The crowd turned away, leaving Redfield to face the burning sun alone. And so the old law that once condemned the innocent now became the end of the guilty. As the dust settled, Sheriff Stone looked at Daniel and Clara. "You're free now, both of you. But freedom in this land always comes with a price. Don't forget that." They rode out of the village together. The sun was falling, painting the horizon in fire and gold. Clara glanced at Daniel. Her voice was soft but steady. "Thank you. You gave me back more than my life. You gave me hope." For the first time in many years, Daniel allowed himself a small smile. Hope was something he thought he'd lost forever. And now it was alive again, right beside him. So, what do we take from this story? Maybe that justice, though slow, will always find its way. Maybe that one person's courage can break chains that others are too afraid to touch. And maybe, just maybe, love can grow even in the harshest deserts. If you felt the power of this tale, please give this video a like. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Now, let me ask you, if you had been there that day, Would you have dared to cut the ropes? Would you have stood against the village and their law? And do you believe cruel traditions should ever decide who lives and who dies? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts.